Introduction. I wish I knew what was going on in his head. How many times have you said these words, or maybe even thought about them? During a poker game in front of your opponent, talking to your superior at work, but also at romantic or more strictly family dinners. It is normal to be tempted by this curiosity. What is the other person thinking? And how could I modify this thought, leading him to do what I want? This is what dark psychology is all about. A branch of psychology that connects mental, behavioral, visual, and linguistic elements in order to not only understand the other person, but also to control them. For this reason, dark psychology is based on two actions, two methods of approach that are similar, but at the same time different: persuasion and manipulation. I have spoken at length about book themes in my book, Mental Manipulation, precisely with the aim of distinguishing them and understanding the fundamental elements of both. Here it will be useful to recall some of those basic concepts. First, let's ask what distinguishes persuasion and manipulation. I would answer with one word: purpose. In the first case, the persuader aims to convince his interlocutor in order to procure him an advantage, while obtaining his own personal gain. The persuader is also concerned about the good of others. The manipulator, on the other hand, seeks only his own individual well-being, to the detriment of the manipulated, who often suffer negatively from the mental action exerted on them. In simple terms, we could say that a friend is persuading us to give up a low-paying job. But if that same person wants to remove us from the job to take our place and earn more money, then they are manipulating us. It is not always easy in life to distinguish between the two actions. In most cases, victims of manipulation do not realize that they are such. You and I, at this moment, may also be subject to negative influences that we cannot identify. Imagine being in the service of someone else's will without knowing it, sensing anxiety, discouragement, and depression about yourself, all side effects of manipulation. Not a good feeling, is it? This reflection allows us to arrive at a conclusion already set out in my previous book. Manipulation is a morally wrong action. Knowingly causing harm to others, limiting their freedom, and heavily influencing their judgment is not a behavior in line with the ethics of our society, and can hardly be justified. For the manipulator, however, this is of little importance. He is usually a selfish person, too self-centered to think about the harm done to others. In some cases, he may even be unaware of the negative effects of his own actions. However, in these pages, we can't let ourselves be influenced by the moral aspect of manipulation. According to the individual events and daily situations of each one of us, manipulation can sometimes be necessary, almost inevitable. Knowing the main techniques of dark psychology, moreover, can help us free ourselves from manipulation, or foresee it before it attacks us. It can therefore always be useful to deepen the knowledge of dark psychology, to dominate the mind of others, but also to defend themselves from any attempts at manipulation. Do you think that in everyday life the danger of being manipulated is not that common? Try for a moment to think about your typical 24 hours. You get up in the morning, greet your family, listen to the radio in the car, carry out your duties at work, buy a takeaway dinner in the evening, and relax watching that critically acclaimed TV series. Most of the actions in this seemingly mundane chain are accomplished through the power of influence, a social, commercial, emotional force that shapes our desires and directs our actions. In the office, you follow the directives of your superiors. In the car, you listen to the music selected by radio speakers. You buy dinner because you are attracted by the menu displayed outside an ethnic cuisine restaurant. Finally, you watch that very TV series because it has been advertised for a long time, and the online charts continuously recommend it to you. You are therefore influenced, more or less unconsciously, by the environment and society in which you live. This is not something to be blamed for. The human being was born to live in community, surrounded by his peers, within a network of relationships, values, and rules that we call culture. In contemporary times, the advent of the Internet, the enlargement of the market, and the tripled speed at which both objects and information travel has allowed individual cultures to increasingly come into contact with each other. Therefore, influence comes not only from the space in which we reside, but also from faraway places, generated by people with different traditions and languages. It is therefore quite normal that our actions are affected by this collective force which, originating from groups of men and conveyed through multiple means of communication, appears as a sort of persuasion that is not always conscious. For example, a singer who decides to use a certain brand of fabric softener does not necessarily want to convince others to buy it, but this will not prevent his fans from buying it, should they find out which brand it is. In this case, we are dealing with a kind of casual, involuntary influence. If, on the other hand, the same singer, wearing a piece of clothing, praises its characteristics in a video, we are faced with a case of advertising promotion, and therefore of voluntary persuasion. I have already reassured you that, in this case, the influence is to be considered normal, although, when it comes to mass phenomena, the buying frenzy can reach atypical levels. This is what happened, for example, with the shoes put on sale last year by a well-known supermarket chain. These events, in any case, are linked to other psychological mechanisms: influence, fashion, the need to conform. So, if it's so easy to be struck by an advertisement, or to get carried away by the fashions of the moment, how easily could you become a victim of manipulation? The answer is more easily than you thought. Understand now that falling into the traps of manipulators, whether they're coworkers, friends, or hardened salespeople, could happen to you at any moment without you realizing it right away. The information contained in this book, along with that already exposed in my previous manual, serve precisely to teach you how to open your eyes, to defend yourself in this world populated by millions of voices. In the following chapters, I will deal mainly with manipulation, to help you recognize the main techniques so that you can imitate them or foil them as needed. There is no doubt, however, that some manipulative mechanisms come directly from persuasion. I have already listed, in my previous work, Robert Cialdini's unfailing principles, which it will be well to mention briefly here as well. Sympathy, physical attractiveness, authority, and consistency are just some of the basic ingredients of persuasion, which are also useful for manipulation. These are physical and intellectual qualities inherited by nature or cultivated over the years, which makes us lovable and trustworthy in the eyes of others. When you don't really have them, it is still good to pretend to have them. If you want to control someone's actions, it will therefore be possible to appear likable only to those who interest us, to take care of our appearance so as to impress only single people, to lie to create around our figure an area of competence that recalls authority. So a seller of water purifiers, even not having any scientific title in this regard, presenting the basic script of his company, combined with a nice smile, could convince most people to buy his product. In addition to these individual qualities, Cialdini also mentions those that are mechanisms of society, such as unity, the desire to conform. For this, fashion has great power. Scarcity, a sales technique that attracts through small quantities or limited offers, just for this week. Reciprocity, i.e., that unwritten law, according to which a favor must always be reciprocated. If I do this for you, you will do this for me. The fixed points cited by Cialdini can vary according to the means of communication used and the context in which it is exploited. In advertising, for example, it will be good to take into account visual and sound components to provoke sympathy or attraction, to stimulate unity or authority. Thus, we can say that, in principle, they will be chosen. Reassuring colors that recall the product. Example, blue to sell a fish. Blunt and not very aggressive shapes, simple enough to be impressed. E.g., the M of McDonald's. Catchy musical words that form memorable slogans. Already famous songs as soundtrack, or original music with a simple and repetitive rhythm, able to become unforgettable jingles. Visual and auditory impact are also fundamental in everyday conversations, those through which manipulation comes closest to us. In my previous book, I devoted a few chapters to communication and body language, but they are such important components that they will return here as well. Communication is the basis of life in society. Even at this moment, by writing this text, I am communicating with you, my reader, with the aim of informing you about a specific topic. We could therefore say that communication starts from the assumption of putting something in common. A gesture, a word, a sound, even a scent that is capable of delivering a message to others. As I have already pointed out, communication develops in a composite world, formed by different codes. The language code is the one most used, both on the written and oral level. In the first case, it is influenced by the space-time distance and the rules imposed on the printed language, while in the second case, it is subject to other paralinguistic elements, the tone, the silences, the pitch of the voice. From each of those elements, it is possible to obtain information about the mood, the thought, the mental state of the addressee. Beyond the language code, then the body code develops. No movement is made by chance, and every gesture, even involuntary ones, can become a source of information. Thus, according to our cultural and personal knowledge, we can interpret more explicit gestures, such as a kiss, and other more cryptic ones, such as the sudden blinking of the eyelids. Understanding others is always the first step to take in order to enter their minds and try to manipulate them, or to defend ourselves from their aims towards us. Talking about communication, influence, and persuasion in these first pages was necessary to analyze the battlefield in which we are going to move. You cannot start a game without having first studied the playing field. So it is important to keep in mind that without communication, influence, and persuasion, even manipulation cannot take place. The next chapters will be dedicated to different topics related to the phenomenon of manipulation, techniques to enter the mind of others, defense methods against manipulation, secret techniques of manipulation, and the importance of kindness. Finally, an authentic story involving a manipulator and the manipulated will help us understand how this phenomenon manifests itself in everyday life, showing us what consequences it entails. Now, we're ready to begin. Get ready to discover all the secrets of manipulation as you delve deeper and deeper into the mystery of dark psychology. Chapter 1. Getting inside other people's minds. Methods for understanding and controlling them. But how did you know? You read my mind. Have you ever said this phrase to a friend or relative? Although it might seem like a very precise statement, it is actually commonly found in everyday speech. When a partner orders our favorite dish for us at a restaurant, when our mother gives us the perfect wardrobe outfit, when a colleague comments on a project saying exactly what we are already thinking. Relationships and daily closeness help people to resemble and understand each other more than we think. The intimacy achieved by spending time with schoolmates, parents, colleagues, often brings mental mechanisms to match. And so, it can seem that someone is able to read our thoughts. In reality, in most cases, this reading happens unconsciously, almost instinctively. In others, however, people rely on information about our lives, our behaviors, our passions, all gathered in a useful database to understand what is going on in our heads. This is not a stage act, like those of the mentalists, but a process that takes into account two compartments of our mind, the conscious and the unconscious. I will now expose you more specifically what they refer to. Conscious mind. It is the first level of functioning our psyche, the one in which we are aware of decisions and actions. To buy this manual and read these lines, now you are using the conscious mind, exactly the same that I have referred to in order to collect and expose the information that I am now transmitting to you. The conscious part of our mind, then, is the logical and rational one, thanks to which we can manage the commitments of a day, study, cook, separate the past from the present. Reflecting, evaluating, making choices are all typical actions of the conscious mind. Using an architectural metaphor, we could compare it to the upper floors of a building, those hit by the sun of reason and illuminated by awareness. Subconscious mind. How many times do you find yourself performing actions without thinking, walking home without realizing how far you've come, wearing old socks while thinking about something else, brushing your teeth automatically without having eaten? These are all acts derived from the subconscious mind. This part of our brain, in fact, refers to instinct and habit, allowing needs and memories to fit together in the background without giving us an explicit sign. Talking up the metaphor of the building, we could say that the subconscious mind corresponds to the basement, the rooms where the rays of logic cannot reach, but which are nevertheless fundamental to support the whole building. The subconscious mind is not only activated in the extraordinary cases mentioned above, it is always present and works hand in hand with our conscious mind. In this basement, in fact, our present memories, long-term memory, all those sensations that we have stored in the course of our life, albeit unconsciously. So a sweet scent or a sudden rustle of leaves can trigger a déjà vu, a phenomenon during which we have the strong feeling that we have already experienced the present moment. I bet this has happened to you several times, and you've certainly been impressed. But in addition to memories, the subconscious mind deals with instinctive and uncontrollable actions, such as breathing, digestion, and blood circulation. All its actions, therefore, reflect on the conscious mind. Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, was one of the first to define, in scientific terms, the functioning of these two areas that are so important to our lives. Even if we don't realize it, they coexist and collaborate continuously. What we experience in our conscious world can be assimilated and then re-elaborated unconsciously. What resides in the subconscious, on the other hand, can influence our choices and actions, even when they seem totally logical. But why is it important to know the difference in order to use manipulation? I'll explain it to you right now. As I mentioned in the introduction, our choices and attitudes are always, in some way, influenced by the outside world. Culture, society, and family shape us as people. With this paragraph, however, we have discovered that influence can also be internal, and a good manipulator must always take this into account. To enter a person's mind with the goal of controlling him, it is not simply a matter of reading his mind, as a magician practicing hypnosis would say. Instead, it is a matter of paying attention to certain external elements that can function as handholds. An unconscious twitch of the eyelid, more silences in speech, the way you dress, even the way you walk. Any of these details can represent a way in which the subconscious comes to the surface, revealing what lurks inside each of us. In the following pages, therefore, we will deal with 3 areas of knowledge that can help us to glimpse the unconscious of others, allowing us to influence it at will. 1.1. Communication Codes. I have already discussed at length the importance of communication, both in the introduction and in my previous book. In the past, I had summarized the communicative functions in 4 points as instrumental, informative, expressive, and controlling. However, there are other classifications, such as that of linguist Jacobson, which take up those concepts, deepen them, and offer us more information about the importance of the subconscious. The functions described by Jacobson are emotional. The sender wants to express emotions and ideas. Factica. When you rely on the medium of communication. Referential. When the message refers to the surrounding context. Metalinguistics. When language talks about itself. Poetics. When it focuses on the message and its formal beauty. Conative. When the message influences the recipient, controlling their actions. The last function, of course, is the one that interests us most, from an explicit point of view. All the others, however, can also intervene positively or negatively in conversations, going against the mission of manipulation. I'm sure more than once you've experienced problems with the line during a call or on Skype. Unforeseen events that have interrupted your speech, preventing you from reaching the end. This is why we can never ignore the medium if we want to approach a person to analyze and convince. The context is also to be taken into account, because it acts powerfully on the unconscious components of the mind, and on the conscious ones related to social norms. So don't dream of using a high tone of voice in a fancy restaurant, or of calling a person who has invited you out for a beer a she. However, the context doesn't always have to be something immediately. You can instead use it to investigate the mind of others and provoke certain reactions. Organize a lunch at home if your goal is to get intimate with someone. If, instead, you want to find out something about his work, for example, follow him in uncomfortable situations, in an elevator, in front of other colleagues, on the side of the road. These places usually convey embarrassment, and the person who is stuck in them may lead to confide immediately, to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. Emotional function cannot be set aside either. Emotions are usually the direct result of subconscious movements, and you will have to learn to read them in order to understand someone else's mind. If you want to find out what a colleague's weakness is, pay attention to their anger or fear. When do they show up? What are their characteristics? What physical signals does he use to express them? If you notice, for example, that he reacts to warnings by bowing his head and then shouting at someone, you'll be able to tell that he's touchy and irritable, which you can then use to your advantage to manipulate him. At the same time, emotionality must become a weapon at your disposal. Feigning interest, showing sympathy, exaggerating emotion are all mechanisms that manipulators know very well. But I'll tell you more about this in the next chapters. Going back to the conative function, that one convinces others to do something, you have to act on their consciousness. Also, though the already mentioned paralinguistic elements, such as voice intensity, which can be high or low, natural stamp, but can be adapted, height, which distinguishes the voice into high and deep, silence, which must be handled on a case-by-case basis. Using these tools, it is also necessary to learn how to interpret them in others. Those who speak in a low voice, for example, show shyness, and shyness surely comes from unresolved, unconscious knots in their mind. Those who take many pauses during a speech, on the other hand, may be insecure, while those who adapt a deep voice are trying to reassure us. All these measures can also apply to long-distance communication. Without a context or reference to direct eye contact, it may seem more difficult at first, but after a while, you can get important information from the way the interlocutor writes, from the reaction time of his answers, or even from the use of smileys, emojis. If someone sends you a message full of hearts, for example, you could deduce that, being unable to show affection in words, you try to do so through these small icons. This is an important fact of which the interlocutor may not be aware and allows you to infiltrate their mind. Just talking about icons, let's introduce the second most important communication code for man, the visual one. Sight is our main channel of knowledge of the world. It allows us to admire it, study it, but also to communicate with it. In linguistics, visual signs, capable of conveying information, are classified into three categories. Icon, a sign inspired by a resemblance to reality. The emoji used in messaging apps are, in fact, icons. Index, it connects to reality, following cause-effect relationships. The rumbling of the stomach is an indication of hunger. Symbol, has no rational relationship with reality, but depends on cultural conventions. For example, the color black in Europe is a symbol of mourning. The first two categories are the most useful to penetrate people's minds. It is no coincidence that iconography is the most used in advertising. Seeing the logo of a company or the brand of a company, even in passing, influences the mind, which often assimilates information unconsciously, storing it in the unconscious. I feel like I've seen that before. How often do you get to say that? I imagine a lot, as well as the rest of the world's population. Images, unlike words, stick more in the mind and, thanks to specific shapes and colors, can be retained in the memory for a long time, only to pop up again when least expected. Television commercials, leaflets still distributed by shopkeepers, banner ads on the internet, political posters and billboards. All this is visual communication, capable of constantly bombarding our brains. If you want to get into someone's mind, you can't ignore this aspect of communication. First, always try to appear visually appealing. Well-ironed clothes, clean hair, neat accessories. Second, in long-distance communication, try to take advantage of iconic weapons, such as emojis. If your goal is more professional and consists in attracting clients or convincing colleagues, use icons and indexes to pull them to your side through advertisements calibrated on visual psychology and PowerPoint presentations always containing the right images. 1.2. Neurolinguistic Programming, NLP. Neurolinguistic programming can be defined as a particular communication system that supports positive thinking and self-help. It was created in the 1970s in the USA by the scholars Grinder and Bandler, who were concerned with the interconnection between language, neurological processes, and behavior. In particular, the two were fascinated by successful people, capable of maintaining a positive and therefore fruitful attitude throughout their lives. According to the theory of these two scientists, neurology and language, interacting with each other, are capable of producing patterns of positive behavior that, with the right approach, can be controlled and programmed. Now that you understand the origin of the name, it's time to reveal what neurolinguistic programming offers. According to the two creators, this type of method would not only help in having a more positive approach to life, but would be useful in eliminating phobias, obsessive-compulsive disorders, depression. The studies, focusing on the setting of the subjective experience, have made it possible to identify the so-called thinking strategies effective in leading the subject to well-being and success. Thus, there are associations of language and behavior which lead the patient to act in a certain way. But what does this have to do with manipulation? You can find the answer in the previous sentence. As I have said, certain structures of thought awakened by linguistic stimuli are capable of influencing the interlocutor so deeply that they plant in his mind the seed of our will. The creators of this programming conceived it with primarily therapeutic intentions, and it is therefore no coincidence that, nowadays, it is used mainly by psychologists and psychiatrists, often combined with hypnosis. At a scientific level, in the years of its publication, it was not positively accepted, but now it has spread all over the world and is exploited by the so-called life coach, personalities who dispense life advice. However, even when it has positive intentions, it cannot be denied that NLP is manipulation. Trying to change someone else's mind, and thus their attitude, is definitely a manipulative act. If psychotherapists do this for good, the same cannot be said of many other people we may encounter on our path. Self-styled cult leaders, salespeople, advertisers, or even friends who seek to apply such knowledge to manipulate us. But you too can use NLP to defend yourself or to attack. Starting from the basics of how it works, which I will explain in this chapter. First, it's good to keep in mind that NLP originates from curiosity, a deep curiosity about our own mind, aimed also at that of others. To be inspired to learn this technique, you need to start with questions such as, why am I sad? Why am I happy? Why did I do this action? Then, those same questions need to be reflected on others in order to understand and, if necessary, manipulate them. Once we've understood this premise, Let's shed some light on how NLP works and its constituent parts by giving some basic definitions. Subjective experience. This is what was studied by Grinder and Brandler, an individual experience that changes from person to person. Subjective filters. Ideas, values, memories, innate traits of our personality that affect the way we see the world. Inner map. The way each person interprets and sees the world. Models. These are the products of NLP, the linguistic and behavioral strategies that influence the subjective experience. To give you some practical examples, just refer to an event observed by several people at the same time. A car accident, for example. Witness number 1 is sure he saw the red light go off. Witness number 2 will say that the light was broken. Witness number 3 will tell us the color of the cars involved, without giving us any information about the light. From this somewhat exaggerated situation, we deduce that each witness, using their own subjective filters, has a different experience. The way we interpret our surroundings, therefore, is always variable and may depend on patterns present in our subconscious. NLP, through communication, tries to propose new linguistic and behavioral models, theoretically positive, that guide the subjective experience. There are 4 major patterns to be aware of. 1. Definition of results. Imagine running a marathon without knowing where the finish line is. Every day you try to run to your full potential, avoiding breaks, following the route, getting more and more tired. Yet you don't know what you'll find at the end of this race, nor do you have any idea when it will end. Frustrating, isn't it? Living without setting clear goals causes the same problems: anxiety, confusion, stress, insecurity. For many people, it is difficult to understand or even admit what they would like. So they orient their actions always started from what they do not want. According to NLP, this cognitive mechanism is wrong because it empties our action of meaning. If you do not have a goal, it is difficult to hold on and get to the end of a marathon. One is doomed to always feel dissatisfaction, shame, and confusion. On the other hand, by setting clear goals, we will be able to organize our lives in a way that achieves them, concerting better and congratulating ourselves on success. From a behavioral point of view, therefore, it is advisable to make to-do lists, not to give up your passions, and to positively evaluate the results, which must be measurable. Linguistically, it can help a lot to talk about one's dreams, admit out loud what one's aspirations are, and accompany this with confident statements, using terms like I want, I wish, I love, I like, etc. This technique is important to reinforce yourself and convince yourself that manipulating might be a good way to achieve the goal you just proposed. However, it is possible to use this knowledge against others. Are you wondering how? All you have to do is instill doubts in their minds, devalue their dreams, point out the absurdity of their ambitions, minimize their achievements. In this way, you will hit their self-esteem, making them more fragile and therefore manipulable. 2. Change direction. Have you ever in your life lost your way? You were on your way to a new place, and even though you had maps and directions, you ended up somewhere else. Even though you knew your initial goal, you got lost and wandered off. How to fix the situation? But of course, by turning back and taking a different route. This sense of loss can also occur in other instances in life. When we fail to complete a job, if the girl we love continually refuses our advances, when our children disobey us despite our attempts to educate them. In these cases, it's good to change your behavior, If what you are doing is not working, try something else. So, if a job is too heavy, ask for help or do it in a different method. If a girl keeps rejecting you, change your courtship strategy or change girlfriends directly. If your kids continue to rebel, start using punishments in a less or harsher way as appropriate. It is essential for the human mind to know that there is always an alternative by which to achieve the goal. So, if you are trying to convince someone, but the threatening attitude isn't helping, use flattery and kindness instead. 3. Understanding events. Here, NLP returns to topics we've already covered: context and body language. Understanding what is going on around you is the first step to knowing how to behave. If you're in a church, you're not going to speak up, and if you're in a concert, don't think you can stand still and be still all the time. In addition to the place, it is necessary to observe people, not only their voluntary movements, but also the color of the skin, the rhythm of breathing, the condition of the hair. Depending on the case, you will be able to interact with appropriate language patterns, and thus ask a pale-colored interlocutor if they are sick, or approach a customer by offering them water if you notice their fatigue. All of this is helpful in gaining the trust of others, and thus gaining access to their minds. If you notice that your actions are not successful, and are even annoying, remember that you can change your strategy anytime. 4. Immediate action. Do you like to put off appointments? Take too much time to analyze a problem, and get crushed easily by boredom. Well, know that this attitude can be very harmful. Wasting time often prevents us from achieving results and makes us helpless in the eyes of others. This is why NLP advises to always act immediately, never putting off until tomorrow what you can do today. By taking charge of your responsibilities early on, showing you are attentive and efficient, you are sure to get positive feedback from those around you. The professionalism you just assumed will help you appear more authoritative. And by now, we know how useful authority is in influencing others. Many application techniques are linked to these main models, such as the Milton model, based on 20 unconscious linguistic patterns to manage in order to think positively, or the so-called learning state, derived from the already mentioned clear and lucid versions of events. The integration of the parts, which allows the resolution of conflicts within the mind. Whichever technique you decide to explore and apply in your life, remember some NLP assumptions that can be useful both to feel good about yourself and to conquer others. If others can do it, so can I. Things are not always as I see them, and the way I see them can change. Experience comes from the systematic reprocessing of information. Understanding what system others use to encode experience helps me to influence them. It is impossible not to communicate. Even standing still and silent, I continue to release information. Everything I need to succeed is already inside me. Communication is its effect. It is not important what I want to say, but what is received by others. The choices people make depend on what they identify as the best option, and finding out what that is will help me learn about their minds. Flexibility of character promotes success. NLP, therefore, offers itself to us as a discipline that acts on two fronts: the internal one, which helps to achieve security and serenity; the external one, which improves our communication skills. Both views can be used in manipulation. If you are more confident, you will be able to direct NLP techniques at others, thus making them your allies. 1.3. Details of body language. Both NLP and the so-called nonverbal communications code focus on the body language. All those signals, conscious or not, through which our body communicates without really speaking. In my previous studies, I have already underlined how important it is for a manipulator to read the body of his interlocutor. Concentrating in particular on the face, where micro-expressions are developed, eyes, mouth, but also hand gestures, shoulder position, tone of voice, and so on. In order to get into other people's minds, it is therefore necessary to catch the right signals and learn to interpret them. For example, the way someone greets you can tell you a lot about their character. If they lean in for a kiss, they are probably an open and helpful person. If they shake hands, they may be more rigid and distrustful. If they wave their fingers at a distance, they may be held back by a strong shyness. There are, however, some external messages launched by the body which do not fit into the usual list of mouth, eyes, and hands that you will have to learn to consider in order to make room in the mind of others. There are signals that I have referred to in passing so far, but which it is good not to forget. Clothing. Dressing is both a cultural and individual act. It is influenced by the fashions and customs of society, but, at the same time, it is a way to express one's personality. It can also depend on other factors, such as gender, age, and religion, so it undoubtedly has a communicative value. A woman with a veil on her hair communicates her religious affiliation right away, while a man with a kilt is emphasizing his ethnicity. Clothing can be a manifestation of more complex ideas, both subjectively and in terms of the grid of society. Wearing a military uniform means being part of an army corps, while wearing ripped trousers could be a reflection of a youth subculture. Have you ever paid attention to these details? Surely, even automatically, you've activated some kind of bias in order to derive from a person's clothing their social status. More or less wealthy people, bank employees or supermarket clerks, high school students and technical students. Trying to understand people's cultural background based on their clothes is a great place to start. But if you want to get into their head, you have to keep in mind that clothes can also hide emotions, feelings, character traits. Those of you who love bright colors are usually sunny and eager to show off. Those of you who use a lot of the ordinary accessories, such as chains or earrings, with macabre shapes, associating them with black, probably have a more introverted and gloomy character. A well-groomed appearance with brand new clothes and shiny jewelry suggests determination and confidence, while sloppy clothing, driven by boredom, may indicate anxiety and depression. All this information, of course, must be analyzed according to the context. If we are in an informal setting, it will be normal to see even university professors in overalls, while during a conference, none of them could do without a jacket. Function of communication control can also be applied to clothing in a more or less voluntary way. If you aim to look attractive in order to charm someone, you will naturally have to take great care in your appearance, the clothes you choose, the shoes you match, even the perfume you spray on yourself. So remember to never take other people's clothing for granted, and at the same time, take care to select yours with the utmost care. Proxemics. We have often talked about the hidden meaning of gestures, eye movements, or lip movements. But it would be good to dwell on another spatial and bodily science, proxemics. This is the scientific term for our position in space in relation to others. Like everything else, it depends on culture and context, but often also on a person's character. Being more or less close to someone during a conversation can greatly affect our goals. If until now you have tried to convince someone without paying attention to the distance between you and them, from now on, you will have to take into account the importance of these spatial zones in the conversation. Public and social zone. These are the ones ranging from 2 to 4 meters away, to be reserved for unknown or unfamiliar people, informal contexts such as meetings, conferences, etc. Personal area. This is the area in which friends and relatives, but often also colleagues, are welcomed. It is reserved for more informal contexts and has a radius of 1 meter. Intimate area. 50 centimeters or less is the space of partners or close family members. Invading it at the wrong times can cause discomfort or embarrassment, as in an elevator, for example. If you want to devise a respectable, manipulative strategy, I recommend that you keep this information in mind and use it for your own purposes. Analyze the way others move to get into their minds. Those who keep their distance in an informal setting are likely to be shy or distrustful. Those who seek contact immediately, on the other hand, might be outspoken, heedless of rules, or manipulative. If you are the one who wants to manipulate, always think about your position in the space. To show respect, keep your distance. If you want to get close, push into the personal zone. If you aim to seduce someone, try to be admitted into their intimate zone. Chapter 2. How to defend yourself against dark psychology. As you may have already guessed, dark psychology is a dangerous discipline, often used as a weapon, of which you may find yourself an unwanting victim. Persuasion, at its source, has no negative motives, but that doesn't mean it can't cause problems for the person being persuaded. Friends or relatives who try to persuade us for our own good are not always actually doing us good. Manipulation, on the other hand, can in no way be positive for the victim, as it is a true form of psychological abuse. Because of its ambiguous and low character, this process is not easy to detect, and many people, despite their malaise, fail to understand that they are subject to it. And even when they do understand it, they struggle to free themselves from the chains that bind them to others. However, by basing yourself on the symptoms caused by manipulation, learning what frailties might be exploited, and learning how to recognize a manipulator, you'll have all the credentials to defend yourself and defeat this terrible weapon of dark psychology. 2.1. Levels and symptoms of manipulation. According to some scholars, there are 3 levels of manipulation, each of which involves a different subjugation and therefore also the manifestation of more or less severe symptoms. First level. This is the initial phase in which manipulation is occasionally administered in small doses. A few sour comments, a discourtesy that might seem unintentional or sparse if exaggerated, compliments. Usually this phase develops at the beginning of the acquaintance and can last a few months, depending also on the level of intimacy that will be created between the two protagonists. Between work colleagues, for example, it could last longer without ever evolving. Between partners or friends, however, who live in close contact, there is a risk that the situation will worsen. For this reason, it is important to pay attention to the symptoms that occur during this period, even if apparently light, such as momentary irritation, fear or misunderstandings, astonishment and confusion, fear of confrontation, doubts about the other person's feelings. Second level. In this phase, insecurity and doubts increase. Criticism becomes more frequent. Emotional blackmail more explicit. The increase in intimacy between the two people will lead to the manipulator to be more direct and cruel, while the victim will begin to question every thought, in the hope of avoiding arguments or reprimands. They will try not to meet the manipulator or go along with him or her in everything. The malaise, on a psychological and physical level, grows, and the most common symptoms are guilt, generalized anxiety, mental and physical fatigue, excessive caution in carrying out any action, fear of external judgment, reduction of personal interests. Third level. This is the most critical phase, the one in which the manipulator has now taken possession of the mind of the other. His presence is constant. His flattery or insults overwhelm the victim. His desires manifest themselves with violence. The victim, in this case, comes close to surrendering. She believes that the manipulator is right and defends him in front of others, while in private she blames herself. She feels the perpetual need to satisfy her tormentor and is reduced to performing every action dependent on him. At this level of manipulation, the symptoms are even more severe. Low self-esteem, anxiety attacks, depression, recurring nightmares or insomnia, gastritis or skin irritation, fear and loss, guilt and the desire to justify the other person. As you can see, having reached this point, the manipulator has now obtained control of his victim, who would hardly be able to rebel since she believes herself to be guilty. Manipulation, in the end, is just that, an attempt to distort the perception of others, making others believe things that do not exist, in order to obtain an advantage. In all of us can hide a potential manipulator or a potential victim. But there are undoubtedly certain elements of character that make some people more exposed to the danger of being manipulated. I will present you to some of them. Fear of negative emotions. Have you ever found yourself holding back anger or trying to chase away sadness with distractions, as long as you don't dwell on feeling it? This kind of attitude, even if it may seem useful at the moment, is linked to the fear of feeling negative emotions. Those who adopt it are usually not open to confrontation, fear the judgment of others, always try to avoid conflict, and do not have the courage to make their voice heard. Naivety. There are people in the world who are too good, convinced that others possess the same scale of values as they do, blinded by an optimism that can become dangerous. If you also belong to this group of people, know that trusting everyone all the time, or being too helpful, could lead you to become a victim of manipulation. Too much of a sense of duty. Have you ever found yourself arriving dead tired at the end of the day because you've done every job you can think of, believing it was your duty? The sense of duty develops in connection with our personal and common experiences. But in separate individuals, it becomes excessive and leads them to bear the burden of all responsibility. If you possess too much of a sense of duty, you risk saying yes, even when the answer should be no, and thus allowing yourself to be manipulated. Too much empathy. To be empathic is to feel the emotions of others in your own skin. Caring for loved ones or being tactful, even with strangers, is not a bad thing. But this quality can also become a flaw when it is used to justify negative behavior. If you're too empathic, you'll probably tend to ignore your own feelings and instead defend those of the manipulator which seem fairer to you. Low self-esteem. If you doubt your every action and don't believe that you are good enough to achieve your goals in life, then you are suffering from low self-esteem. Manipulators usually take advantage of such people, using their insecurities to control them. Emotional dependence. Usually those who have low self-esteem are very empathic or too naive also, find themselves afraid of being abandoned. If you constantly seek the approval of others and feel a strong desire to please, you may be prone to emotional dependency. This fragile condition is an invitation to manipulators who can't wait to find someone to subdue. As you can see, all these unbalanced attitudes can lead you to become a victim of manipulators. So, to avoid being seen as possible prey, I recommend that you first analyze yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, and then prevent them from taking over your character and leading you to being manipulated. 2.2. How to recognize a manipulator. In the previous paragraph, I advise you to focus on yourself from a character, psychological, and emotional point of view. Recognizing our possible weak points helps us defend them, while treating the symptoms with the right care can allow us to escape the clutches of the manipulator. But how to recognize it? Now I invite you to direct your gaze outward again, so that you can catch all those suspicious behaviors that fit the identikit of the manipulator. Intelligence, but little empathy. Manipulators are usually also narcissists, so they can't understand the emotions of others, have no awareness of the seriousness of their actions, and act based on intelligent but cold and insensitive calculations. In some manipulators, this occasional detachment is evident, but others try to mask it with false kindness, so be very careful. Charm and charisma. The manipulator usually does not act with violent tactics, but tries to charm those around him. He is precise and reliable at work, seemingly romantic in relationships. He makes an effort to smile, flatter, help. He is very attentive to his physical appearance, his clothing, his movements, and takes advantage of all to appear mysterious or attractive. Ambiguity and slow speech. During most conversations, the manipulator acts, and therefore his way of speaking may be different from the norm. He chooses deliberately ambiguous words, insinuates doubts, makes many pauses. He also makes his tongue long, curvy, and attractive, so as to exploit it to bamboozle his prey. Arrogance and security. The manipulative subject, even if he often feels insecure inside, tries to appear strong and arrogant on the outside. This attitude helps him strengthen his authority and, moreover, contributes to increasing his charm. Friendly and smiling. Especially in the early stages of acquaintance, the manipulator tries to gain the trust of others by presenting himself as nice and friendly. At the right moment, however, he will reveal his true nature, insinuating doubts, making a few uncomfortable jokes, in short, making you feel uncomfortable. Selfishness and false sense of sacrifice. Manipulation is for profit, for personal gain, so it goes without saying that all manipulators are selfish. They often find themselves showing this particular side, minimizing the problems of others and pretending to be willing to do anything for others, but really thinking only about themselves. These are, in principle, the main characteristics of a good manipulator. As I am sure you have noticed, they are not easy to identify, especially taking into account the fact that anyone could be a manipulator: a friend, a parent, a more or less close relative, colleagues or superiors at work, a partner. Therefore, it is necessary to go deeper into the subject, talking about defense techniques. 2.3. Tips to guard against manipulation. Recognizing a manipulator and being aware of the damage they have done is not always enough to defend yourself. Many people, even identifying the above-mentioned characteristics in several suspected individuals, let themselves be blinded by affection and end up considering every clue useless, every symptom negligible. How many times have you felt guilty after an argument, even though deep in your heart you knew you were right? If it happened often, and always with the same person, it means you were manipulated. Perhaps, thinking about it later, you too realize this. They did nothing to intervene. Probably you have also justified your opponent, believing that he didn't do it on purpose, or letting yourself be carried away by affection or admiration. It is difficult to think badly of the people we love or respect. So even when we recognize that their influence on us is negative, we always try to protect them, to keep the ideal we have of them shining. In these cases, therefore, even if we find all the traces of a possible manipulation in the relationships, we are not able to rebel. Fortunately, I have some advice to help you find the center of your life through reflection, psychology, information, and good habits. To be able to defend yourself from manipulation, you must try to follow them at all times, even when your brain is in automatic mode. Training yourself to learn, to perceive every possible risk is fundamental, so as not to miss any hint of manipulation. Therefore, read the next points carefully. Don't trust too easily. As we have said, naivety is a characteristic that makes us vulnerable and therefore exposed to the aims of manipulation. To avoid the risk, instead of assuming that all people are good and kind, start with the exact opposite. Everyone could be a potential thief, cheater, manipulator. Don't hand over your money randomly to anyone on the street who claims to belong to a charity. Don't believe all the scary stories about the boss told by your colleagues at work. Don't take the advice of an envious friend without first weighing up the pros and cons of such a choice yourself. So try not to always leave the field open to others, and instead start trusting yourself. Pay attention to the language. As I have already reminded you, manipulation is based on communication, and therefore on language. It is important that you are able to use all your knowledge in this regard to expose the manipulators. I am not talking, of course, only about the words themselves, but also about all those paralinguist elements that accompany them. Too high a tone of voice can conceal a lie. Too rapid speech communicates haste and disrespect. Silences can serve to make us uncomfortable. There are also formulas of courtesy, compliments, or flattery that you must learn to be wary of. Not all of these words, in fact, are pronounced with sincerity. Learn to say no. Your boss asked you to work overtime, and you agreed even though you knew he might not pay you. Your wife convinced you to book a very expensive vacation, even though you're short on cash. A friend of yours begged to borrow your car for the weekend, and you agreed, even though you know you might need it. All of these cases demonstrate insecurity and lack of willpower. Being kind to others does not necessarily mean always saying yes. You don't have to worry about what they might think if you refuse. Nor do you have to imagine that all their problems or desires are also yours. Instead, remember that you are your own individual with your own ideas and needs, deserving of attention and happiness. So start valuing your time and desires by learning to say no to others when you need to. Pay attention to your feelings. Talking to a colleague at work, did you suddenly feel uncomfortable? In the company of a man, during a dinner out, did you feel uneasy? These alarm bells should never be ignored. It is unhelpful to justify them by blaming yourself. It is much better, instead, to try to understand where these feelings come from what they have originated. Of course, it can happen that you dislike someone by skin, but it is always better to investigate the question. So, you might find that the discomfort stemmed from the fact that your colleague made a joke about the way you talk to customers, while perhaps, during dinner, the disquiet arose because of too much winking smiles, or too provocative questions. To prevent manipulation, it is always important to listen to your feelings. Always keep the context in mind. Every communicative action takes place in a precise social and cultural context, which you should know in order to avoid the onslaught of manipulation. At a business dinner, for example, you're more relaxed than in the office. This could lead to colleagues gossiping and having things said that would be better kept to yourself. In the romantic realm, context might be exploited by the manipulator to create a certain atmosphere and force you to lower your defenses. Why don't you invite me in? Let's put on some music. Have another glass of wine. Are all phrases that demonstrate an attempt to control the context. If your desires don't match those of your eventual partner, then avoid falling into the trap, and try not to enter contexts that might involve more intimacy. Even in business and advertising, it is always important to keep your eyes open. Do not rely on the first menu you see hanging outside a pizzeria. Do not fall into the traps of discounts. Always calmly evaluate the proposals of sellers. Do not overlook the symptoms. Do you feel anxious for no apparent reason? Do you often experience headaches or intestinal problems? Are your nights dominated by nightmares? All of these are symptoms of stress, generalized anxiety, depression, conditions that, in turn, can be triggered by manipulation. When you happen to be sick, don't treat the symptoms with indifference. These ailments never occur for no reason and often stem from toxic relationships, rigid work environments, controlling friends. So try not to underestimate your body's messages, and instead, try to link them back to a possible cause. Accept that you're wrong. We all have a fear of failure, but that doesn't mean we should feel guilty in case we get it wrong. Perfectionism, fear of not being enough, and obsession with pleasing others inevitably cause sadness, weakness, and submission. If you've often felt stuck at the thought of failure or unnecessarily blaming yourself for mistakes that were inevitable, always remember that to err is human. No one is perfect, and life itself always puts us in situations where both losing and winning is perfectly normal. So don't listen to those who blame you for their problems, and don't worry excessively about the judgment of others, always trying to please them. Instead, think about yourself first and what is important to you. Don't get involved in the discussions. Often, the manipulator attacks through insults and insinuating statements, which can cause arguments. During arguments, these individuals tend to lash out at the other with very heavy insults, absurd accusations, and recriminations that, even if false, can do a lot of harm. So when you understand that the situation is heating up, try to impose your position, declaring that you don't want to talk about it anymore, and preventing yourself from listening to all the negative things the manipulator will say about you. Warning: I am not advising you to behave as he wishes in order to avoid his anger, but rather to frustrate his attempts to overwhelm you. Go to another room. Close the call. Refuse to see him. In this way, you will be able to reduce his negative influence and not let yourself be touched by his offenses. Know thyself. I've already explained to you what weaknesses are usually attacked by manipulators: naivety, sense of duty, emotional dependency, etc. To prevent others from exploiting them, you must be the first to know. Therefore, try to analyze your emotions and your decisions with an objective look, to understand if some excesses or some flaws could open the doors to manipulators. In this way, you will understand what to modify about your character to best defend yourself. Love yourself. This might seem like overly abstract advice, but I think it's good to remember how important self-love is. Acknowledge your achievements. Don't belittle your values. Brag to your friends every now and then. Don't be ashamed of your passions. Always prioritize your happiness. In this way, you will be able to resist the attacks of anyone who tries to insinuate insecurity and pain into your life. Surround yourself with positive vibes. Have you ever felt cheerful and relaxed after a night out with friends? And has the embrace of a loved one, sincere, ever helped you get through a difficult time? I already know the answer to that, and that's why I suggest you always stick with people who can make you feel good. Sometimes, it might be difficult to distinguish from bad influences, because manipulators are used to pretending. But to choose them, I suggest you always rely on feelings. If in the presence of friends, colleagues, or partners, you don't feel a strong sense of unease, if their comments don't force you to question yourself, if their smiles seem sincere, then take advantage of their help to distance yourself from those who could hurt you. Turn to a professional. When the symptoms of a toxic relationship occur, it's not always easy to trace them back to their source. If the anxiety, sadness, and psychosomatic problems continue for too long, and you don't know how to deal with them, I recommend you see a psychotherapist. These professionals can make you reflect on yourself. They can help you identify the cause of the discomfort and even change some of your attitudes so that you are more resilient to possible future attacks. Don't let prejudice debase you. Remember that everyone is entitled to help, and going to a psychologist is a perfectly normal action. Learn manipulation techniques. Knowing your enemy is critical to countering them. As I have already mentioned, learning manipulation techniques is very important to recognize them when they are used against us. If we can identify these strategies in the other person's attitude, we will unveil their game and be able to defend ourselves better. This is also why, in the next few chapters, I will reveal to you what the most important manipulation techniques are. Chapter 3: 10 Basic Manipulation Techniques. Through the road traveled so far, we have entered the world of dark psychology. In order to make it clear to you how to defend yourself and later attack, I have taken the time to analyze context, body language, and all that might be the side effects of manipulation. Among the final tips, I have suggested that you learn manipulation techniques so that you can become capable of protecting yourself. Of course, you can also use the secrets revealed in this chapter in a different way, more congenial to your needs and goals. The difference that exists between persuasion and manipulation, as I explained to you earlier, lies primarily in the goodness of intent. But this doesn't mean that the manipulator is necessarily an evil person. The tools here are provided by psychological research and scientific experiments. The way they are used, then, depends solely on the individual, his point of view on the world, the techniques he has adopted to defend himself from his enemies, the values he has assimilated from childhood. What I am trying to say, basically, is that everything will depend on you, because you are an individual person, a subjective being, an individual. I recommend, therefore, that you use the following techniques with caution, never losing sight of your desires, but, at the same time, never losing sight of your morals and values as a human being either. Having clarified this premise, I will try to anticipate what you will find in this chapter. In the manual I produced previously, entitled Mental Manipulation, I left a lot of space for persuasion, analyzing it mainly from an economic advertising point of view, bringing up the tricks of price tags, funnel marketing, and so on. Of course, I also dealt with manipulation, citing some basic techniques that can be used both face-to-face and remotely through advertising media. In these pages, I will take up some more of those concepts by explaining them to you from a psychological point of view and accompanying them with direct examples, so that the knowledge gained from reading my first book can be integrated. Now that you know what you're up against, I'd say it's time to delve into the world of manipulation. 3.1. Lying, the basis for manipulation. In my previous work, I mentioned lying and omission as techniques of manipulation. In fact, they are so important that we could consider them the basis of this process. Telling lies, hiding certain truths, pretending to forget them are all general actions that we can find in any manipulative technique. For example, to force someone to feel guilty, we might exaggerate the effects of their mistake, to hit them with positive reinforcement. On the other hand, we'll compliment them on merits they don't actually possess. But we'll talk about these weapons specifically later. Now I just want you to understand how the lie is essential, absolutely necessary. We could compare it to the cement with which we build the building of our manipulation. Even if we have all the manipulation techniques possible, if we are not able to lie, the building will collapse. But why is deception so important in the art of manipulation? The term manipulation itself explains it to us. Have you ever thought about what that word means? In the dictionary, you'll find a practical definition first, since to manipulate means to touch, to work a substance in such a way as to change it. When we manipulate people, therefore, we aim to change their minds, to change the way they see reality. This is why lies, which go against the truth and therefore against reality, can never be missed. Know, however, that there are different ways of understanding lies, which differ from each other in subtle ways. Here they are. Lying in the narrow sense. Saying one thing for another. Altering the past. Messing up information and thus creating a new reality. Lying at its simplest means answering a question with a falsehood. But if you want to do it right, you can't leave anything to chance. Forget childish lies, told in haste, under pressure, and easily detected. You can't risk being found out, or your reputation will be at stake. So create realistic lies, which have contact with the truth, and differ from it only in a few points that are always plausible. Remember that the single lie sometimes cannot survive on its own and needs to be included in a web of falsehoods. If you lie to a colleague one day about a project, you cannot, when talking about the same project in the future, let the truth slip out. A mismatch between the two pieces of information could make your colleague suspicious and expose your game. My advice in this case is to organize multiple lies well, through several steps. Think thoroughly before saying them. Integrate them with the surrounding reality. Always remember to whom they were said. Finally, keep in mind in detail what was said, so as not to invent discordant lies. Denial. How many times have you, after making a mistake, denied that you were responsible for it? That's also lying. Denial manifests itself in a particular form of lying, whose only job is to always say no. Did you break the vase? No. Do you know what they might ask tomorrow at the exam? No. Did you meet anyone last night? No. The whole slew of denials can serve a variety of purposes. To keep someone from taking advantage of your kindness. To give you an advantage in the workplace. To keep hidden an action that you know could hurt the other person or get you in trouble. Sometimes denial can also be useful to cover up a previous lie. When one of our lies is discovered, we can take refuge behind a "No, you're wrong, I didn't say that," or a "No, I didn't say that." Even in these circumstances, though, I would advise you to keep your web of lies in mind. Denial must always be credible. It cannot oppose a factual reality to which there are witnesses. So if you ever find yourself lying in front of multiple people, or doing any other untoward action, leaving evidence around, know that instead of denying it, it would be better to admit everything. When the evidence is overwhelming, denying objective reality would make you look petty, untrustworthy, or, even worse, stupid. Acknowledging that you were wrong, on the other hand, can instill a positive feeling on those who look at you. After all, even in these cases, there's nothing to stop you from masking your mistake with lies other than denial. I didn't do it on purpose. I was given the wrong directions. I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Omission. I had already mentioned this point in my previous book, but I cannot omit it in this paragraph devoted to lies. To use a pun, I absolutely cannot omit it. But what does the omission consist of? I'm sure that, even if you're not familiar with this term, you too have omitted more than once in your life. Maybe by avoiding telling your parents that you failed a test. Or maybe by keeping quiet to your partner about the fact that his cooking doesn't drive you that crazy. In the examples given, omission becomes a kind of prevention of future evils, a thoughtfulness towards others to avoid hurting them or sending them into crisis. However, it is still part of the minefield of lies, and therefore must be handled carefully, especially if we use it to manipulate the listener. The omission is useful because it helps to shape reality, completely eliminating some pieces of it, of which the manipulated will perhaps remain forever unaware. So, if it's convenient for you, maybe at work you'll find yourself giving enemy colleagues less information than you actually have. You can avoid, at home, giving details of your movements if you don't want your partner to know where you've been, and so on. In case you are asked questions about the missing parts, I will simply adopt denial and lies. I don't know what you were talking about. I didn't notice. No one informed me. Fiction. Pretending is a declination of lying, which, however, goes far beyond the simple creation of one or more lies. Pretending means acting, impersonating an alter ego, taking care of every last detail of one's appearance and language so as to involve the interlocutor in a farce. We could therefore say that pretending is the most evolved and complex degree of lying. Depending on your needs and goals, you can adopt this technique on both defense and offense. Fake unawareness if you want to hide a mistake in the workplace. Fake repentance if you want to be forgiven by your partner after a betrayal. Fake excitement and surprise to please a friend who has just given you a gift. Depending on the situation, the people involved, and the goal to be achieved, the script you will have to adopt will be different. Generally speaking, the most used by manipulators are the authority script and victim script. The first, as I have already mentioned, consists in always appearing self-confident, determined, but still available to others, open, sensitive when needed. The second script, on the other hand, focuses more on the world around us, and consists of complaining about life's trifles, accusing others of having it out for us, and blaming every problem on a conspiracy or bad luck. The authority script serves, of course, to become a fixed point for others, a person on whom they can come to depend. The victim script, on the other hand, stimulates empathy in others, who would be inclined to offer help and, perhaps, to submit without realizing it. In any case, the scripts, as I have called them, can be merged, mixed, and their use usually gives rise to real manipulation techniques, such as those you'll see in the next few pages. Now that you know specifically the various characteristics of the world of lying, you can better understand the secrets of manipulation. Keep in mind one thing, though. Lies, fictions, and denials just described may seem easy to use, but that's not always the case. As in all arts, mastering manipulation requires training, intuition, and intelligence. You can't start off with meaningless lies, expecting to see who knows what results right away. Instead, it is important that you learn to observe reality well in order to be able to modify it. You will have to study people, understand what kind of lie could appeal to their heart, and what extent they could believe it. It will be fundamental not to lose sight of the context. Understand how much a lie could be credible if told in a certain place, and in a certain way. Of course, you cannot forget body language, and indeed, you must strive to control expressions, tone of voice, posture, in order to be taken seriously. There are many things to think about, but with practice, you will be able to build a network of lies that will allow you to use the most complex manipulation techniques. 3.2. First technique, evasiveness. With this paragraph, I intend to open the pages dedicated to the discussion of the 10 fundamental manipulation techniques. First, we will discuss evasiveness. I have chosen to start with this technique because it depends closely on the relationship between truth and fiction. Indeed, it could in some ways come close to omission or fiction, even if it is not to be as described as outright lying. Evasiveness, in fact, is a way of escaping questions, avoiding uncomfortable situations, appearing to be almost unavailable, but then, in reality, never being so. To some extent, it could also be related to the technique of deflection, which I have discussed in my book, Mental Manipulation. Diversion, as the name suggests, is about diverting the attention of others to something else. For example, if money in the family is brought up in an argument and you feel guilty about it, you can use another hot topic to make people forget about money. This technique can also be used in context. If you're talking to a friend on the street, you can interrupt their awkward conversation by pointing out a shop window, a passing dog, interesting decorations, in short, anything that will break up the conversation. Evasiveness also works in the same way, and if by itself is not enough, it is often followed by deflection. Is a client asking you for more details about a contract that might convince them not to sign? Answer in a general way. Man is trying to win you over by asking what drink you'd rather have. Give an ambiguous answer and have fun watching him guess. The important thing, in these cases, is not to deny the truth, but to leave it in suspense. Hiding something or triggering feelings of confusion and discomfort in the other person is possible, even without lying. If you then notice that the interlocutor, despite your avoidant attitude, continues to insist, then enter the field with a deflection and change the subject. Don't do this too quickly or drastically. This may give away your desire. Instead, try to find topics that connect, in some way, to what you were talking about even earlier. Below, I offer some basic tips to help you succeed in being evasive. Answer the questions with more questions. Comment on the question with a joke. Take a break before you answer. Pretend you don't understand and ask for a repeat. Answer by talking about something else, only touching on the real subject in passing. Make a quote, literary, artistic, or related to the part of life you and the interlocutor share, that fits the question but doesn't actually give it a real clarification. Change your answer to others with formulas such as "I've heard," according to most people. It minimizes the importance of the question. By following this list, I'm sure you'll be able to be evasive at every opportunity, continuing to gain trust by not really giving anything back. 3.3. Second technique, reinforcements. Speaking of lying earlier, I mentioned the term reinforcement, which may have seemed unclear to you at the time. Actually, if you've already read my previous book, you might have an idea of what I'm referring to. But the terminology is a little different, so let's go in order. According to psychological sciences, there are attitudes assumed by others that can act on humans in the form of reinforcements. That is, they have the ability to nourish what is hidden within us. A compliment, for example, strengthens our self-esteem, while being defended by a reproach increases our gratitude. From this simple example, you can see how crucial reinforcement used in manipulation is. The title of the paragraph, however, speaks in the plural, so it is clear that there are more reinforcers, 2 to be exact. Also present in the example, positive reinforcement, that of the compliment, and negative reinforcement, that of the reproach. Now, I will reveal the secrets of both. Positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement can be compared to seduction or flattery. It consists of showering the other person with compliments, expressions of affection, and proofs of trust that will make them feel considered and appreciated. In its discontinuous form, this reinforcement works almost like a reward. Receiving appreciation, confidence, or trust only infrequently, the other person begins to submit with the goal of getting more and more. It's the same reasoning, often made by trained animals. They give you their paw and roll on the ground because they know that in your hand you hide a crunchy treat just for them. Positive reinforcement, however, can also be constant, so strong that it becomes obsessive. In this case, it is similar to the love bombing, the bombardment of affection that I mentioned in my previous book. This technique is especially useful in group contexts, or when you develop a very intimate relationship with someone else, or so you have the opportunity to be in their company or to contact them, often even at a distance. Love can manifest itself through offers of support, advice given at all hours of the day and night, compliments involving any trifle of daily life. Especially at a distance, positive reinforcement has great potential. Sending a message full of hearts and sweet words every hour, showing concern and interest through phone calls, makes the other person feel loved. Described in this way, bombing doesn't sound like anything special, but, in fact, when directed at the right people, it causes addiction and submission. Therefore, I recommend using both versions of this tactic on insecure, often marginalized individuals who feel alone or misunderstood. These people usually feel a deep need for recognition and approval. If you are the one to offer it, they will try to repay you in any way they can, feeling bound to you by gratitude and respect. So use kindness, understanding, compliments, but also small real gifts, material, with which to win their hearts. A jewel for your wife, a pen for your colleague, a cake for breakfast for your friend. In this way, you will make them happy and, at the same time, you will be able to control them. Negative reinforcement. Given the name, it might seem that negative reinforcement is the opposite of positive reinforcement and therefore consists of insulting, attacking, psychologically destroying a person. But in reality, this is not the case. Negative reinforcement, in fact, is so called because instead of adding positive things, it subtracts negative things. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? Let me try to give you an example. A colleague of yours is struggling at work. He's due to hand in a document later today, but he has too much on his plate, so he doesn't know if he'll be able to meet the deadline. At this point, you offer to do some of his work, reassuring him that it's not a problem for you to help him, and that he may be able to reciprocate in the future. By acting in this way, you have just applied the technique of negative reinforcement. By eliminating your colleague's problem, you have made him lighter, happier, and he will surely remember this, becoming indebted to you. As you may have noticed, also in this case, a sort of exchange mechanism is activated. In positive reinforcement, the victim's gratitude comes from love. Here, instead, from elimination of an obstacle. But in the end, it is still gratitude, a fundamental element to bind others to your authority. Negative reinforcement, like positive reinforcement, can be consistent or alternating, and the effects are slightly different. Constant reinforcement causes a real addiction because the other person will feel unable to do anything without your help. Intermittent reinforcement, on the other hand, leaves you on tenterhooks, makes you live in hope, and triggers the anxiety of wanting to pay back. The subjects to hit with this technique can be many more. Maybe not everyone needs love and compliments, but for sure there are many people who are doubtful, insecure, who do not like to take risks, and therefore rely on others at every opportunity. In general, therefore, negative reinforcement is more likely to be used than positive reinforcement. Depending on the people you're dealing with, decide which of the two to use, and you'll find everyone at your feet. 3.4. Third technique, creating guilt. I have mentioned guilt often in these pages, and I also referred to it in my previous book. It is that feeling of discomfort or self-hatred that develops as a result of an action deemed wrong. It derives from the perception of ourselves in relation to the outside world, and therefore also from a scale of social rules and cultural values that consistently influence us. Unfortunately, in the course of life, it happens to everyone to experience this unpleasant feeling. I suppose it's happened to you too. Maybe as a child, you felt guilty when you disobeyed your mother. As a boy, the moment you got a bad grade in school. As an adult, for wronging your loved one. This sense of guilt, in short, develops as a self-condemnation for oneself, which is activated unconsciously, and therefore it is almost impossible to fight. Even when the reality of things suggests otherwise, the sense of guilt often does not hint at disappearing. It is a persecution that many victims of aggression experience. They blame themselves for what happened, believing that it was their clothing or their attitude that triggered the wrath of others. Guilt takes over when, even seeing the objective reality, you can't accept it, and you tend to feel guilty at the time. Altering reality is really the main task of the manipulator. So understand that guilt can prove very useful in this regard. Guilt, in fact, makes others feel out of place, at fault, and thus makes them eager to fix things, to remedy their hypothetical mistakes. People so weak and willing to obey are just what a manipulator needs. If you want to play with guilt, however, you have to choose the right subjects and the right times. Certainly the people most likely to feel guilt are those who are most empathetic, who can easily identify with others, and who can feel their own suffering. If you are hurt by a joke uttered by an empathetic person, they will absorb your pain, apologize, and then continue to think about the incident for hours, perhaps days, with the intention of never treating you like that again. Lonely and insecure people are also excellent prey. Often, these people have difficulty relating to each other and pay great attention to their actions. By accusing them of having made a mistake, you can easily put them in crisis and force them to apologize by paying you back in some way. It's a technique that works especially up close, with people we often deal with, and many people also use it unknowingly within their love relationships. To make you more conscious of your actions and allow you to get a clear view on guilt induction, I will list some practical phrases that usually end up triggering it. Why didn't you do that before? This question serves to make the victim doubt that she is late and will make her regret not taking action sooner to accomplish 100 tasks. You never think about the consequences. It's a phrase that makes people feel careless or insensitive. Those who hear it vow to pay more attention to everyone and everything throughout the day. How did you get it wrong? It's a way to emphasize the ease of a task and showed feigned surprise. The victim in this case will feel humiliated, inadequate. I don't think that's what the problem is. It's an assertion that serves to imply that the problem depends on something else, and more specifically, on the victim herself. I was really hurt by it. A confession from friends or lovers that attacks empathy and will force the victim to revise all their behaviors. This is not normal. This comment is related to the shared value scheme. It serves to make the victim feel strange, abnormal, unable to fit into a healthy society. As you may have noticed, these are ambiguous, insinuating phrases. In none of them it is shouted out loud, "You're to blame." Such a simple attitude may not work and be easily exposed. By acting in a more veiled way, however, guilt will creep into the minds of others without them even being able to necessarily link it to you. 3.5. Fourth technique, triggering shame. Picture the scene. A colleague of yours, during a business dinner, tells about the time you spilled coffee on you before a meeting. Or your mother, in front of your friends, starts pulling out all the photos of you as a newborn, completely naked. Or, again, after discovering that you like watching animated movies, your partner jokes about it whenever he can, even in the presence of friends. These are all uncomfortable situations, aren't they? That's because each one, in its own small way, brought shame to the surface. Shame is a feeling that comes from the perception of oneself in relation to the world. When you realize that you have said something too much, that you have dressed badly in relation to a certain situation, that you have acted instinctively, that you have made yourself look ridiculous in front of others, you feel out of place, and therefore you feel ashamed. Although it may not seem like it on the surface, this feeling can be very useful for manipulators. Shame weakens the opponent, embarrasses him, and often convinces him to change his attitude. Exactly like guilt, shame can act in delayed bursts. Those who feel it often carry it around for a long time, even when the situation that triggered it has ended, and continue to brood over everything they have said or done. Again, the juiciest prey are insecure and shy people, already in themselves. These people don't like to interact, tend to speak little, and would like to remain in the background. If they are struck by shame, they will find it difficult to recover. However, shame can be a weapon to point at even unusually strong and confident people. Everyone has their weaknesses, and there is something in everyone's life that can be considered unseemly, embarrassing, if not downright disgusting. The secret to discovering this weakness is to analyze people, as I have already advised you. Find out about their lives and their past, and then attack them in sensitive situations, perhaps in the presence of other people. So if perhaps you want to get back at a chatty friend, reveal one of his embarrassing secrets while you're out on a date. If, on the other hand, you want to punish your partner, point out how disgusting the rude thing he did to you is. If you want to attack a coworker, throw the occasional joke out loud at him. Below, I'll point out a few practical acts you might find helpful in making someone red with shame. Make jokes about the victim's flaws, physical or character. Answer his serious questions with sarcastic comments. Throw acid remarks at his work, even when they are not required. Make fun of his passions, calling them useless or childish. Refer to embarrassing past events. Make comparisons to other people, pointing out to the victim how different or isolated they are. Bring up intimate details, whether it be about sex life, religious beliefs, studies done, etc. Refer to social rules or moral values, even if they are outdated or not commonly shared, to make the victim feel wronged. As you may have noticed, these are risky actions, because you never know in advance how the other person might react. Therefore, I suggest you study your prey well, and always have a response ready. At worst, you'll be able to defend yourself with a simple, "Sorry, I was just kidding." 3.6. Fifth technique, rationalization. I ask you again to make an effort to imagine the scene. A husband cheats on his wife. Instead of apologizing when he is discovered, he justifies himself with reasons he considers valid. Alcohol, distance from family, or perhaps the time in his life. Instead of talking about his mistake, he reanalyzes the process that caused it. He is rationalizing. Rationalization is a logic-based mechanism for dealing with most problems and is especially useful for keeping emotions at bay. It is a mental road that many people take automatically, especially if they are calculating, practical people, always well planted with their feet on the ground. So you will understand that, like many other techniques, rationalization is not a bad thing. It is very useful in the workplace to overcome unforeseen events, in the study or at home, to quell sudden crises, in the relationship, to calm the anxieties of a partner. However, if necessary, it can also be useful for manipulation. Appearing serious and rational gives you an extra edge and allows your arguments to be stronger and stronger. All your choices and actions, however cruel they may be, can appear acceptable when you explain them with the sole help of reason. As you may have guessed, in order to rationalize, it is often necessary to lie and exonerate oneself. I have already told you about lying and guilt, but here it is necessary to point out a detail. While guilt must be present in the victim, you must never appear guilty. To do so, you can blame the other person directly, or shift the blame to people or things far from you, a friend, a partner, the weather, bad luck. Couldn't make it on time? Must have been the traffic. Did you forget an anniversary? Stress and work commitments are the real cause. Were you caught with a pack of cigarettes in your bag? But it wasn't yours. It belonged to a friend. All of these lies serve as exculpatory and are the basis of rationalization, as they alter reality with reasonable excuse. This technique, however, is recommended for situations much more complex than those mentioned above, which allow to reach a really deep manipulation degree. Rationalization, in fact, works better if used for a long period, always with the same person, because it helps to change his way of thinking and relating to the world. Going back to the initial cheating example, pretend the husband was never found out. How does he keep his wife's doubts at bay? It's very simple. By linking his every action to a plausible cause, and then also dealing with explaining his wife's feelings, convincing her that her suspicions stem from stress, loneliness, negative influence of friends. Rationalizing, therefore, serves to profoundly alter the mental structure of the victim. 3.7. Sixth technique, minimizing. I think you're overreacting. There's no reason to worry like that. Take it easy. It's not important. How many times have you said or heard yourself say these phrases? In any case, we are dealing with a process of minimalization. As you may have guessed, it consists in excessively deflating a problem, to make it appear insignificant and unworthy of attention. Although it doesn't seem like it, unlike other techniques, minimization is always bad, because it's very different from what reassurance might look like. When you're trying to calm someone who is actually worrying too much about something, you're not minimizing, but you're trying to bring the problem back to reality, assigning it the right value. If, on the other hand, you treat a really serious problem with indifference or sarcasm, then you are reducing its true value, and thus using minimization. Is the difference clear? To be more precise, let's give some examples of minimization. A colleague has made a serious mistake at work, would like to fix it, fears he may suffer repercussions. No way, you say. It can happen to anyone. Don't think about it anymore. I mean, you're minimizing, and the colleague, happy to be able to appease his own anxiety, listens to you, lets it go, doesn't try to fix things. This negligent attitude of his is eventually noticed by his superiors, who actually punish him with a warning, or even go so far as to fire him. You must have realized then how dangerous minimization can be. It's an excellent way to attack, as in the example, but also to defend. Usually, in fact, after rationalization comes the time to minimize. The cheating husband in the previous paragraph, after rationalizing, might end the conversation with, "You worry too much," typical of someone who wants to hide something by minimizing it. 3.8. Seventh technique, playing the victim. I can't get anything right. Everyone's against me. I always have to work harder than everyone else. These are typical victim's copy jokes, which I've brought up before when talking about fiction. The manipulator doesn't get benefits just by showing strength. Even doing the opposite can sometimes help. Pretending to be haunted by bad luck, complaining about the meanness of friends or classmates, avoiding blame and always giving it to others are ways to appear worthy of pity, and therefore help. Victimhood is an attitude that can be quite real. Some people possessing a distorted idea of the world or of their own abilities suffer from persecution mania, feel hindered by everyone, invent enemies and problems even when there are none. You, however, if you want to use the victim card to manipulate, you will have to be very careful not to get carried away. If overused, it risks making you annoying, too weak, almost ridiculous. If, on the other hand, it is dosed according to the situation, it can be useful for exonerating oneself, activating the empathy of others, obtaining help, making people feel guilty, making them feel ashamed. In short, playing the victim can serve to activate more easily many of the techniques already mentioned above. It helps you get intimate with people, and you can also use it to slander your enemies. Also, you don't always have to be the victim of the situation to be weak. You can be unlucky, and yet still work hard. Be active and ready to roll up your sleeves. In this way, admiration for you may even increase. Look how well she works, is happy, despite what happened, others will come to think. But what qualities do you need to play the role of the victim well? I'll leave you with a list of tips that might help you play the script perfectly. Don't show satisfaction with your results. Emphasize how hard it is for you to do a certain thing. Feign a spirit of sacrifice, pointing out that you're only doing an action out of goodness, not wanting any compensation. Complain about bad luck by talking about unforeseen, even made-up events that have happened to you. Pin the blame on others, painting them as envious, mean, vindictive. Don't ask for help directly, but pretend you don't know what to do to improve your situation. Repeat over and over how happy you'd like to be. 3.9. Eighth technique, intimidation. So far, I've told you about fairly subtle techniques that can be used against certain types of people with great caution, never going overboard. But there are also more extreme, fear-based manipulative actions, such as intimidation. If on the surface, This technique seems too exaggerated to work. Know that instead, it is one of the most common, because less complex than others, and used in all social contexts. At home, many parents threaten to beat their children, or, unfortunately, they actually do it, in order to be obeyed. At school, bullies enforce themselves by using force. In the workplace, many superiors take advantage of their power to harass employees. Finally, in the life of a couple, possessiveness and jealousy often manifest themselves through intimidation. In many cases, intimidating someone is a natural act. If you are angry, grumpy, or too lonely, you end up influencing the actions of others almost unintentionally. If you, however, want to purposely control the minds of others, I recommend that you use this technique carefully. In this extreme version, it manifests itself in fits of rage, even feigned ones, explicit threats, yelling, and petty revenge, hitting the victim if he or she does something we wouldn't want. However, I suggest you adopt a softer form of intimidation, based not so much on shouting as on authoritative warnings, threats thrown in as a joke, a few ambiguous jokes, seriously but not too angry reprimands. It's good that the victim fears you, but also that he or she continues to have some confidence in you. It is precisely the victim, after having suffered these injustices, who will feel humiliated, will tend to consider himself guilty of these reproaches or threats, and will try to go straight to prevent a situation from happening again. She will obey your requests, respect you, do everything to please you, submit in hopes of being forgiven. 3.10. Ninth technique. Denigration. Have you ever been teased at school for your hobbies? Have you ever received insult related to your physical appearance? Has anyone ever spoken ill of you to other people? If it happened to you, you were undergoing a denigration attack. To denigrate someone is to belittle them, to devalue them, to defame them in front of other people. This is a not very complex technique, which can be contained with broader manipulative plans, such as guilt and shame instigation, and usually follows intimidation. However, even used alone, with consistent intensity, it can have devastating psychological effects. Continuously subjugating someone to mockery, attacking him physically or professionally, laughing at his passions and mocking him in front of other people, perhaps strangers, usually produces embarrassment, sadness, real existential doubts. Of course, it's a technique you'll only need to use with people you know thoroughly, and who already prove to be insecure, since someone with a strong character, on the other hand, might rebel against insults, even in a violent way. So choose your victims carefully and advance in small steps. Start with some sarcastic comments. Find a nickname that fits one of his peculiarities. Constantly criticize his work. Invent rumors about him and spread them among the acquaintances. In this way, you will hit his external reputation, but also his self-esteem, forcing him to leave the group, to change office or class, or, if it's a love affair, to follow your decisions and your advice without protest. The best way to act, in short, is to know the other person's weak points and hit them with calibrated force. If someone should try to rebel, perhaps even aggressively, try to use this to your advantage. Is a friend yelling at you because you're always criticizing him? Accuse him of raising the bar too high. Does a colleague point out rumors to superiors? Deny ever hearing them and give vague answers. Does your partner complain that you never listen to him? Blame him for always going on about the same things, and his arguments can be boring. By combining denigration with lies, in short, it is easy to use it and always get away with it. 3.11. 10th technique. Emotional blackmail. As the name suggests, The latter technique is based on emotion and is therefore among the most difficult to use. The manipulator, after changing his victim's way of seeing, may also be able to control what he feels, giving very precise imputations, to which correspond responses that he knows very well, giving love to create dependence, using anger to awaken fear, feigning sadness to attract pity. Emotional blackmail, in short, works by exchanging one emotion for another. The manipulator offers his own emotions to the victim, and the latter, by receiving them, develops others, which make him even more submissive to his executioner. Emotional blackmail can contain some elements typical of other techniques, such as guilt, shame, gratitude, and is the last step to be taken to completely control the other. Because it combines the psychological strength of all the dark secrets of dark psychology that I have revealed so far. As I have already explained, using it is not easy. Usually, it's not a useful technique with people you don't know very well, and it can be used only intermittently, like reinforcement, because its functioning depends precisely on constancy. In order to understand it, you will also need to try to really develop your empathy. Many unaware manipulators are not clear about the emotional reactions their actions might cause. But if you want the blackmail to work, you have to learn to know those reactions. Of course, you won't need to get to feel them on your skin, but certainly understanding a person and their feelings is a great place to start. You can, for example, use romance, organizing a romantic dinner, and so obtain the unconditional affection of your partner. Even after having betrayed him, you can pretend to be desperate in front of your parents to stimulate their compassion and manage to get some money from them. You can appear stressed and nervous at work and awaken the kindness of some colleagues who will decide to work hard for you. Emotional blackmail, in short, is a hidden exchange, and, precisely for this reason, it can be even more useful than other techniques that produce the same results. Sometimes when you try to intimidate someone or shame them, you risk being found out. If, on the other hand, you try to undermine them using not words, but emotions coming directly from you, your whole strategy will remain carefully hidden. Emotional blackmail is difficult for the person undergoing it to perceive, and even invisible from the outside. We can therefore say that this is a real and secret technique, capable of making you a manipulator in all respects. Chapter 4. The Importance of Good Handling Manners. He's so nice. He really made a good impression on me. If you've ever found yourself saying this phrase, you've probably done so with an appreciative smile on your face, pleased with the person you've just made contact with, and perhaps eager to get to know them further. If, on the other hand, it was you who received such a compliment, and it was a sincere compliment, then I congratulate you. Kindness, or good manners in general, are fundamental to having constructive relationships with other people. An affable smile, an offer to help, hospitality, but also gallantry, are all forms of attention to others which most people appreciate. Thanks to kindness, many feel at ease, believe they are receiving special treatment, and therefore not only get a good idea about you, but also lower their own defenses. Distrust disappears, fear subsides. The person becomes more open, and therefore also easily attacked. True kindness, which comes from habit or character, can be strengthened and improved if you have manipulative intent. In the previous chapter, we noted how compliments, flattery, and offers of help are integral to some manipulation techniques, such as positive reinforcement. In these pages, I'll try to go into more detail, talking about manners and how to apply them to prune a manipulative mission. 4.1. Kindness. Why it matters. The adjective gentle has a very long history, both from a linguistic and literary point of view. At one time, it could indicate nobility of soul, the kind that drove poets to sing in an almost platonic way of love for ladies. But for us, nowadays, what does it represent? It is not difficult to try to give a definition. Think of a person who always responds with a smile, who can speak politely, who reacts to your needs by satisfying them. A partner who brings you breakfast in bed. A colleague who lends you his pens in times of need. An unknown salesperson who offers you help in a store. All of these people are kind. They are so because they are being courteous to others, though all with different reasons and purposes. A partner is being kind probably because they are in love. The coworker might be doing you a favor because they hope to be reciprocated later. The salesperson is trying to sell their store's product, so being kind is in their interest as a persuader. Kindness, in short, can have varying degrees of sincerity and, moreover, be used for different purposes. There are those who naturally find themselves being too kind, and this is to their detriment. They can't say no. They offer to commit themselves in place of others. They give a lot and receive nothing in return. On the other hand, those who, by nature, are grumpy, solitary, and fail to conform to social laws, end up being even more isolated. An annoyed reply, a nasty comment, a lack of attention to others, are not seen well in our world. Have you ever returned to an establishment where the waiters are nervous or uncaring? I don't think so. Well, I bet you prefer to take your coffee in those bars where you can be served by a smiling barista who, perhaps, between one customer and another, also finds the time to chat with you. Again, as you can see, kindness depends not only on one's nature, but also on the context and goal. I'll try to give you examples of kindness in each area to help you understand how important it can be in life and in manipulation. Kindness to strangers. It is the most formal phase of politeness and, strangely enough, the one we tend to exploit most automatically. Try to think about it. When you are introduced to someone for the first time, how do you act? You probably smile, hold out your hand, make some pleasantries. Try to listen to what they have to say. If you are in a formal social situation, you will use formal speech, and you will keep your distance. If, on the other hand, you are in an informal context, in the town bar or among friends, you will call everyone by their first name. You will use a lower linguistic style. Perhaps you will raise your voice. In any case, politeness with people you don't know is essential to making a good impression. If you struggle to be nice to strangers, I suggest you change your attitude. Both shyness and indifference can be mistaken for arrogance, and arrogance resulting in dislike. Kindness in the relationship. Butterflies in the stomach. This is how we describe the feeling of falling in love, which often corresponds to the first stages of a relationship. In this period of getting to know each other and settling in, kindness is the order of the day. You want to impress the other person. Make a good impression. Stimulate their affection. Yet, as time goes by, with affection also comes increased familiarity and decreased kindness. I'm sure this has happened to you. The habit of being in a couple after some time leads to the neglect of kindness. That's why many people start discovering some flaws in their partner after the first couple of years of relationship. However, remembering to be kind in this context is important. Not necessarily to hide one's faults, but also to make the other person feel appreciated. If both members of a couple fail to be kind to each other, they will find themselves paying the consequences with sadness, nervousness, depression, which could lead to the end of the relationship. The same result can be reached if one of the two, instead of kindness, manifests opposite behaviors: offended silences, insults, continuous accusations. The important thing, in order to keep the relationship in balance, is to develop an appropriate kindness, not cold and set like that reserved for strangers, but more intimate and subtle. If you want to hold on to your partner, perhaps even through manipulation, never forget to reserve a few kind words for them. Kindness in the family. The family context is the first one we come into contact with from a social point of view. As children, we are more inclined to treat our parents with respect, while they treat us with more gentleness. As time passes, however, kindness almost completely disappears from most family environments. If this has happened to you too, that you respond badly to your parents or don't listen to your children's requests, don't worry too much. It's normal for habit to make certain people so close that they are almost considered part of the house you share. However, when we become adults, it is important to try to master our temper, which in the presence of family members tends to manifest itself without filters, in order to place it in the light of kindness. If you can't maintain a good relationship with your parents or siblings, even after you leave home, you may find yourself in difficulty in your time of need. No financial help, no psychological support, no favors that can be reciprocated. So start by changing your attitude around the house. Help your parents if, perhaps, they need a hand with the new ultra-modern televisions. Offer your brother a few pieces from your wardrobe that he might like. Accompany your sister to her friends when she asks. Try, in short, to treat your family members as friends. Of course, there will be quarrels and disagreements. But if, in everyday life, you behave in a kind manner, you will succeed in being seen in a positive light. Kindness in marketing. In this macro category, I include the kindness that serves to bring economic profit and then you can find in stores, websites, leafletting, clubs, etc. In some cases, it is mixed with the rules of common living. A bartender, for example, is not only nice for his own benefit, but also because, from his position of serving the public, that kind of social behavior is expected. Whether defined by social mores or the desire to enrich oneself, however, this kindness serves a very specific result: to bring the person to our side. Because of this, I would say that it is most important from a manipulative point of view. For some tips, take inspiration from cosmetic representatives who are kind and yet so obsessive, or maybe from leaflet distributors who always approach you smiling, making jokes, treating you kindly but as a friend. These two figures are the strongest in the informal field. But you need to be convincing in the office, during a meeting, or with an important client. You will have to combine politeness with elegance. Make small smiles. Take care of your clothing. Use courteous and appropriate words without risking too much irony. In this way, you will show that you are kind, but also professional, and therefore worthy of trust. Through this brief review, we have understood how kindness can intervene in manipulation. It is indeed a way to help the other, but in some cases, it becomes a useful weapon for ourselves. Being nice might help you exert a new kind of control over others by convincing them, persuading them, or perhaps luring them into your manipulation traps, set up through the techniques seen in the previous chapter. 4.2. Good manners and manipulation. How to use them. Manners are a set of unwritten rules, varying by culture and society, that the individual is often required to follow in order to be seen as a member of that particular social group. In Japan, it is good form to take off your shoes as soon as you enter the house. In Italy, it is better not to keep your elbows on the table during a meal at a restaurant. In many African countries, it is good to eat only with the right hand. In short, good manners serve to show respect towards others and make our figure welcome in a given context. The first thing to do in order to properly apply good manners is to understand where we are from a geographical point of view. What is acceptable in Italy may not be acceptable in another country, and vice versa. Then, we need to analyze the ever-present social situation, formal or informal, intimate or communal, etc. In the following, we will try to respect all the necessary rules, combining them with politeness. Polite behavior is often already inherent in good manners and can be manifested through various tricks that I will show you below. Listen carefully. In almost every country in the world, it is a good practice not to interrupt the person who is speaking, and indeed you should pay close attention to the other person's speech. In some societies, the order in which you can speak and address each other depends on age, gender, social status. In the West, people are usually less strict on this point, but it is always good to keep the context under control. Don't interrupt a professor in the middle of an explanation, but keep the questions for later. If you are in a group of friends, take turns with who is speaking without covering him, but at the same time without letting him have the monopoly on the conversation. In any case, it may help you. Don't continue other people's sentences. Don't give advice before the speech is finished. Don't intrude with comments during a story. Doing so will show that you are listening, and therefore that you care about the topic or the person who is saying it. This sensitivity of yours will be rewarded with the trust of others. Smile often. When the subject matter allows it, smile at the person you are talking to. Ask polite questions about what they are talking about, and maybe laugh at their jokes. This will help them feel at ease and thus lower their defenses in your presence. Maintain eye contact. In order to show interest in someone, you must commit and maintain eye contact. When the speaker is being watched, they understand that they are being heard and therefore gain confidence. Watch out for shy people, though. When they do speak, they are often afraid of others' eyes, so don't stare at them and always try to smile. Use body language well. As I have already explained to you in detail in my book, Mental Manipulation, the body is very important for conveying messages to others, and therefore also for showing good manners. If you're in Korea, you'll have to make a small bow to show gratitude. In Italy, a handshake may suffice. Don't cross your arms if you want to appear amenable to others. Hold your head up if someone is talking to you, and don't go overboard with closeness if your social situation or relationship with the other person won't allow it. Remember these basic formulas. Thank you, please, good morning, and good evening. These are words we are taught as children, and as we grow up, we risk losing them. A good manipulator, on the other hand, should always keep them. To gain trust, you need to be gracious. Thanking them and asking them, please, perhaps then responding to their gratitude with, you're welcome, no big deal, I've enjoyed helping you. Use the quid pro quo. This Latin formula stands for a technique of persuasion that I mentioned in my previous work, namely, reciprocity. Even if you don't exploit it as an actual strategy, remember that it's still a basic rule of most societies. When you get something, the other person always expects a reciprocation, and vice versa. So in adopting good manners, remember that your kindness will be repaid and will make you able to control the decisions of others. Chapter 5. A History of Manipulation to Understand Its Techniques and Effects. So far I have spoken to you about manipulation in theory. Although I have given you many examples from everyday life, I would now like to show you a real-life story that applies some manipulation techniques and also sheds light on all the psychological effects it can cause. I have therefore collected the testimony of two people involved in a story of manipulation, and I hope that analyzing it from both the manipulator's and the victim's point of view will help you with using this manual. 5.1. A Dangerous Friendship. The protagonists of this story are Claudio and Giuseppe, fictional names with which I will protect the identity of the manipulator and the manipulated. They are two grown men who have known each other since high school. Back then they were desk mates, and they became life companions too. At school they exchanged homework. On the street they walked and whistled at girls together. In his third year of high school, however, Giuseppe flunks out. The two no longer attend the same class, and the dynamics of their relationship change. Now Claudio experiences everything in advance and can help Giuseppe with what awaits him in the future. New subjects, high school exams, enrollment in university. Giuseppe, who has been left behind, has never worried much about his school performance. But with the passing of time, the shame of being rejected turns into insecurity. To quell it, the boy clings to the comfort offered to him by his friend. Thanks to him, he can prepare himself for the difficulties of life, without trying too hard to find out for himself. He graduates a year after Claudio with a lower grade, enrolls in the same university, even though he doesn't like chemistry very much, and studies on the old books his friends hands him. Claudio is always willing to support him. He speaks with the authority of his extra year, and, even if he sometimes appears arrogant, he helps his friend in every situation, with exams and even with women. Giuseppe tries to repay him in any way he can. He offers him lunch, lets him stay at his house after he gets drunk, accompanies him to parties even when he has to study. His performance at university, however, is as poor as it was at school, and the boy begins to think that perhaps it would be better to change facilities. What are you talking about? With chemistry, we'll definitely find jobs. Besides, I'm here to help you. In another faculty? Who would pass you the notes? Claudio makes this speech often, so Giuseppe is convinced to stay there. And he stays there for almost 5 years while his graduate friend is already looking for a job. When he finally gets out of university, Claudio is there, ready to shower him with advice, fill out your CV, and send it to this and that company. Attend this master's degree course, do this interview. Giuseppe would like to concentrate on teaching, but Claudio considers it a mediocre job for losers, and convinces him instead to try his luck in the business field. He, Claudio, has already been hired as an expert in a textile industry. Giuseppe fumbles. He doesn't know what to prioritize in order to find work. As always, he falls behind. Meanwhile, in an effort to focus on research, he neglects his friends. You're shutting yourself off too much, Claudio pointed out. Are you by any chance depressed? You'll never find a girl this way. Giuseppe doesn't know if his sadness could be depression, but in reality, he has already found a girl, thanks to the internet. He lives in another city, and on social networks they discuss books, which has always been his true passion. But for Claudio, long-distance relationships are not real relationships. Even if Sonia, the girl in the books, and Giuseppe have met often and are good together, that doesn't count. It's just a rebound. You should give up the fantasy and think about real life. On reflection, Giuseppe realizes that perhaps his friend is right. Comparing himself to him, he feels strange and inadequate. Claudio has a job and also a real girlfriend, whom he sees every day. He has gathered a good group of colleagues and friends around him and is carrying on with his life. Giuseppe, on the other hand, is still behind. He feels guilty for the choices he had made in his life, feels ashamed to talk about his love affair, and feels indebted to Claudio. So he leaves Sonia, spends the last of his savings to get a master's degree, and tries to fight the anxiety that devours him. It's the right choice, Claudio reassures him. I hope they take you into the same company as me. So we'll still be together, always together. 5.2. Handling Techniques and Effects. The story told might strike you for its simplicity, but I chose it for a precise reason, and that is to show you that manipulation can hide anywhere. It doesn't have to be extreme like the one operated by religious sects. Not very evident like in advertisements. It can also exist in a simple yet morbid friendship, like the one between Claudio and Giuseppe. The former evidently wants to overrule the latter. He is happy to be seen as a guide and wishes Giuseppe would follow his advice as if it were divine law. What's his motivation? To make Giuseppe a servant of his own ego. In order to feel satisfied, Claudio needs Giuseppe to always be there beside him, ready to lend him money, to laugh at his jokes, to praise his success. He is a narcissist, and this is his ideal of friendship. To achieve his goal, he uses various manipulative techniques. Did you recognize them? I'll list them for you briefly. First, he exploits positive reinforcement, helping his friend at school and university, being kind and always available. He binds him to himself through a feeling of gratitude mixed with desire and thus manages to convince him not to change faculty. Later, he intervenes with the creation of shame. He mocks his friend's job and forces him to head somewhere else professionally. When Giuseppe begins to neglect him, Claudio adopts another technique, instigating guilt. How dare his friend be depressed? He should leave home and find himself a real girlfriend. It is precisely the criticism of Giuseppe's relationship that is part of another technique, that of denigration, and leads the boy to question every choice he makes. In all of this, the effects on Giuseppe's life are more than obvious. He is already a confused person, tried by failure, who, to avoid making another mistake, leans on his only friend. He does not create his own critical thinking, ignores his passions, and silences his needs. Even though he has doubts about chemistry, he applies to that faculty. He wants to be a teacher, but instead ends up going to a very expensive master's program to get into business. He is ashamed of his own weakness, and instead admires Claudio's strength. He feels indebted to him, and comes to think that not listening to him might be disrespectful. In the end, he is subjected to his friend's will, that he leaves Sonia only because Claudio criticized their relationship. The sadness Giuseppe perceives may actually be depression. One of the side effects of manipulation, along with anxiety, confusion, and guilt, all emotion he feels. Through this story, you are able to see the manipulation techniques used in the field, understand the motivations of the manipulator, and discover how much pain a manipulated subject can feel. I hope this final reality picture can help you use the manipulation secrets in this manual wisely, and perhaps help you break free from a toxic relationship, as Giuseppe should too. Chapter 6. Chapter Bonus. You are almost at the end. As promised, there is a very interesting bonus chapter from my first audiobook, Dark Psychology and Manipulation. I invite you to listen to it as it is my first work. It is better to understand all the processes behind manipulation and manipulators. But where does it all come from? What is the origin? Everything starts from communication. As I always say, in life, you cannot communicate. Everything we do is an act of communication. Therefore, it is extremely important to understand and analyze this very important art, because we are talking about art, and not everyone can use it in the best possible way. Communication is one of the skills of human being. We all are born with already a series of innate abilities that push us to have relationships with others. Communicating is so deeply entrenched in us that already in the mother's womb, the baby recognizes and discriminates voices from other noises, since voices are extremely important to him than any other stimulus. As soon as he is born, the little one recognizes the human faces, even if he still sees very badly and doesn't distinguish colors. as if an internal program immediately told him that the primary need is precisely that one: to see, that is, other humans, and deal with them as soon as possible. We are programmed to communicate. Furthermore, we can't afford not to, whether we choose to or not. There are very few moments in our life when we don't communicate at all, even though you may never have noticed. There are times when communication is evident. For example, if you are talking to somebody, waving goodbye, writing a message. There are, however, other times when the fact of being communicating is less intuitive. You could keep your eyes down so as to not interact with your neighbor, signaling, with this attitude, that you don't want to have anything to do with him. You may not answer a phone call. What kind of communication is this? You are wondering to yourself. Well, has it ever happened to you that someone viewed your messages without replying? Didn't he communicate something to you? His attitude of him. Among other things, the habit of not responding artfully is rather manipulative, or just not giving a feedback to an invitation. You could communicate by wearing the shirt of your favorite team, or by carrying some specific accessory related in some way to a political party. There were years when the keffiyeh was very fashionable, but that's just an example. Or you could communicate your status by wearing fashion shoes or a very expensive bag. There are plenty of moments in which we communicate than those in which we remain disconnected and don't do it, even when it comes to unconscious or even unconscious actions. Sometimes these are involuntary actions, which we would have gladly avoided, betraying feelings and thoughts that we would have kept to ourselves. Communication influences. I'll tell you right now, to dispel any doubts, communication requires, in one way or another, that you want to influence someone, whether they are one or more people. It may seem strange, but no type of communication does not have some form of influence on it. From the beginning, the newborn cries to push the mother to feed him, take care of him, change him, and cuddle him. He automatically directs the behavior of others and has just come into the world. Further on, when we are explaining or informing, or otherwise, among our intentions, there is always that of pushing the interlocutor, or the reader, to do, say, or think something in particular. If there is no such function, there is no communication. Perhaps an exception could be poetry, expressive communication. Still, even in this case, I would not be so sure of the absence. That said, it goes without saying that what makes a difference is how much and how of influence you want to exert. It's all there. I'm not even saying that the only intent is persuasion. There are also many other functions and purposes, but that is always. Communicative functions. Communication has much more than a function. Let's see them, and you will see for yourself that, at least in part, the attempt to affect the interlocutor never fails. Instrumental function. Used when asking for something specific in return. Can I try this shirt on? Will you offer me a cigarette? Is this seat free? Information function. When you give or ask for information. A lesson, a manual, a request for information. The more it has a predominant, informative function. Expressive function. When you want to express your feelings, when you confide in yourself, when you console or let yourself be consoled. When, in short, emotions dictate the line and are the most important part. Control function. When you want to explicitly address the thought or actions of someone, whether single or group of people, the control function is not so linear and always the same, however. In fact, there are multiple levels which vary from the intention to the means used. The communicative control function. This category includes different types of communication, all, however, with the explicit intent of influencing the listener. Remember that the other functions also always have a certain desire to influence, but in these cases, it certainly goes further. It becomes the main purpose. Explain is the first level of control. I explain to someone who knows less about the subject in question. Consequently, after my explanation, this person will have an idea or attitude that he did not have before. For example, I explain how certain loans work and how they are requested. Convince. Things get complicated here, because convincing implies that, somehow, the interlocutor already has information on the subject. Indeed, maybe he has an attitude or a thought that we want him to change. The act of convincing is entirely the prerogative of the rational. Therefore, it brings with it arguments and logical thinking, without implications of an emotional nature. I can explain to him why, on a logical level, it is worth asking for a loan, rather than paying a whole amount immediately. Persuasion. In terms of results, persuasion may not necessarily be very different from conviction. The point, however, is the method used. If I want to persuade an interlocutor, I don't use only logic and rational arguments. Still, I also work on emotions to ensure that the person in question is induced to change his attitude driven by emotions and impulses. I can persuade my client to take out a loan that I am offering him. Manipulate. This is the deepest level and is the most difficult to manage due to morals. In fact, it is a question of exerting a very strong occult influence on the interlocutor, which in this case, we could also define the victim, without even the latter noticing anything. With mental manipulation, we are in the field of thinking direction, brainwashing. It is certainly not something to joke about, and it is certainly not something that concerns only business, although manipulation is a common practice of companies and multinationals. Politicians are often manipulative, preferring to be voted on by favoring unconscious processes rather than preparing a valid program to illustrate. The same goes for the media that daily try to direct public opinion, not to mention the sects of various kinds, which ensnare the victims and keep them tied up with love, guilt, threats, and much more. Then there is a whole category of 21 natural manipulative people, called psychic vampires for their ability to suck energy and cancel the will of others. These people often make up with colleagues, friends, especially in the family or partner. I hope you have never had anything to do with it. I think that with these notions, we can finish the bonus chapter I decided to give you for trusting my work. I hope you enjoyed it. I invite you, if you want, to follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and I would be honored if you would give me a review on the product page. I'll leave you to your conclusion. See you very soon. Hey, are you still there? I was thinking, what if, before I left you to your conclusion, I gave you one more weapon against the manipulators? What if I told you there was a way to tell if someone was lying to you or not? Open your ears wide and listen carefully to what I tell you. We all lie all the time, several times a day. Lying in itself is not to be condemned, as it can be helpful in not revealing uncomfortable truths. Who, for example, has not lied about a dish cooked by their partner in order to not displease the person who has spent a whole day preparing such rubbish? In short, we often resort to lying as a social convention to avoid unnecessary conflict. Lies can also be a useful tool for persuasion. A typical case is salesmen who deliberately omit the defects of the product they are promoting to entice us to buy it. If taken to excess, lies can also have damaging consequences, even turning pathological, creating enormous damage to ourselves and others. This is not the place to delve into such a matter. We are more interested in understanding what the unconscious signals related to telling a lie, to defend ourselves from those who want to lie to us, but also to better cover the small, inevitable lies that we will find ourselves saying every day to achieve our goals are. Discovering a lie is not so complicated. All of us, unless we are professional liars, tend, involuntarily, to send unequivocal signals when we lie. Therefore, in this chapter, we will try to understand how to detect a liar and cover up our lies when we need to tell them. Some liars are very good at lying, so we will look at a wide range of methods to provide us with the tools to do this. Only professional liars, such as actors or spies, have virtually total control over their behavior and body language. Detecting a person who is used to lying is not always easy. A combination of body language and other signs will help us understand whether someone is telling the truth or a lie. Let us now see what elements are capable of betraying a lie, whether told by us or others. 1. The eyes. We have devoted an entire chapter to the eyes. We know, therefore, the fundamental role they play in nonverbal communication, in their ability to establish an empathic relationship between us and the other person. We will also discover how the gaze indicates lying. So when we know that we have to lie, perhaps our project is still at a standstill. Our boss wants reassurance. Watch your eyes. When we lie, we do not like to have constant eye contact with our interlocutor, precisely because, unconsciously, we know that our eyes could betray us with their involuntary expressiveness. For this reason, we tend not to look into the other person's eyes, preferring to shift our gaze in different directions constantly. If someone tends to avoid our gaze when talking, they have something to hide from us. On the other hand, if we do not want to be discovered, we should look for the gaze of our interlocutor, without, however, wanting to overdo it by trying to maintain the utmost naturalist, alternating direct vision with a slightly wandering gaze. 2. Body language and lies. Nonverbal signals are often an unmistakable sign of lying, and controlling these signals means that we have made a huge step forward in our ability to omit what is uncomfortable for us to say. When we lie, we often tend to be agitated, blink rapidly, smile poorly, and have small, subtle changes in our tone of voice. We may also cross our arms, telling the other person that we have something to hide. Again, we may shake a part of our body, such as our feet, tapping one of them continuously on the ground, denouncing our state of agitation. Finally, a clear element of lying is the conscious touching of our nose, forehead, and ears. Controlling all these elements is not an easy job. Still, in this guide we will find all the useful tips for extremely persuasive body language. 3. Lies and details. When we lie, we tend to provide additional, often unnecessary information without being asked for it. When we lie, we think that sweetening our story will make it more believable. In reality, this only makes us less credible, and we risk contradiction and exposure. So when someone tells us of an event in too much detail, they are probably lying to us. It is better to try to maintain our normal conversational tone and avoid overdoing it. 4. Beware of contrasts. Often, when telling a lie, we have contradictory communication. In particular, we may claim to have done something, but at the same time, our boss moves in denial. As already mentioned, controlling your body language is not easy in situations like these, and if you don't have a guide like the one we are reading to you at your disposal, be careful, therefore, to send a body language that is consistent with the vocal one. When we lie, we play defensively. When we tell a lie, we tend to be defensive. We often do everything we can to draw the listener's attention away from us. We tend to get overly nervous if our word is questioned. Nothing could be further from the truth. Those who tell the truth should not get upset, but remain calm, as if they had a clear conscience, or even take offense, but never get angry. Another defensive behavior is to suddenly change the topic or discussion when entering into arguments that are too complicated to handle. If we want to lie, we try to avoid sudden changes of topic that could confuse or even make our interlocutor suspicious. 6. Liars' micro-expressions. Micro-expressions can be deeply revealing of lies. A micro-expression is a very brief expression of body language, often lasting about a 25th of a second. The micro-expression is always revealing of a hidden emotion. We are talking about a half smile that lasts only a moment, or an anxious look that lasts only a breath. In other words, when the person in front of us behaves as if he is happy, but in reality he is very much annoyed by our speech, bordering on anger, we can read his true emotion when a very quick grimace of anger appears on his face, like a bolt from the blue. It does not matter what the hidden emotion is. It could be anger, fear, jealousy, rather than happiness. The interesting thing is that, despite one's best effort to hide what one is thinking deep down, such emotions seem to find a momentary, brief outlet in such micro-expressions like a river in a flood. 7. If we lie, we don't want to repeat it. Another of the easiest ways we can tell if someone is lying to us is to ask them again to repeat the story they have just told us. People who lie will often have difficulty repeating their lies. If we lie, we avoid being clumsy. We try to prepare an airtight story in advance to avoid unpleasant lapses and contradictions with our body. 8. He who lies speaks slowly. In most cases, lies are born live, on the fly, from strictly contingent situations. This is why we speak at a slower than normal speed. It may even happen that we interrupt ourselves several times while we are talking to have the time to say the right thing, or at least the thing that is most appropriate to the situation that has arisen. Finally, a very important recommendation. There must always be a valid motivation behind a line. We have seen how difficult it is to lie without being caught, and one has to be a real communication expert. Lying is a kind of shortcut, an emergency exit that should only be used when necessary. It is always better to prefer sincerity, which is certainly a longer way to go, but which will bring great success thanks to our advice. Now I would say let's leave you to your conclusions. I won't make any more jokes. See you soon. Conclusion. Here we are at the conclusion then. The techniques I've described are the most common and widespread, the ones that guarantee more defense in persuasion and manipulation, and they can also be useful to you. You may have your business that has just started, or that is struggling to take off, or that you want to make a quantum leap together with your personal life. Some of these strategies are completely harmless. Others instead borrow, even with full hands, from full mental manipulation. Their use must be done in an intelligent way, combined with an excellent knowledge of the context, of your product, and above all, with good motivation. If we know how to put into practice every single precept of what has been said, we will be able to live a decidedly simpler life. This is because we will be able to understand the ideas and purposes of others, thanks to an excellent knowledge of the techniques of dark persuasion and psychoanalysis that, I want to point out, will be complete thanks to the study of more specific texts.